The call came on a Tuesday morning in October, while I was sitting on the back porch watching the mist lift off the lake. I had my coffee. I had the sound of the water. I had everything I needed, which is exactly what my son and his wife were about to try to take from me. I almost didn't answer. I saw my son's name on the screen and I thought, good, he's calling to check in, maybe ask about Thanksgiving. So I picked up and said his name the way fathers do, warm, unhurried, glad to hear from him. He didn't even say good morning. Dad, listen, Renee and I have been talking, and we've made a decision. We're moving in with you. We'll be there by the end of the month. You've got 4 bedrooms sitting empty, and frankly, it doesn't make sense for you to be rattling around in that big house alone. Renee's already looking at which room will be the master for us. Sophie can have the one with the lake view. Oh, and Renee wants you to clear out Carol's studio. She's going to use it for her home business. We'll be there in about 3 weeks, so start making room. He hung up before I said a single word. I sat there holding the phone, watching a heron land on the far dock. The lake was perfectly still. The coffee had gone cold without my noticing. I want you to understand something before I go any further. That house, 4 acres of lakefront property outside of Cooperstown, New York, is not just real estate. My wife Carol and I broke ground on it in 1997. We spent 7 summers building it, arguing over window placements and porch widths and whether the kitchen should face east or west. She wanted east, so it caught the morning light. I built the bookshelves in the study myself, shelf by shelf, because she liked the smell of pine. She died 3 years ago in the bedroom we shared for 21 years in that house, and the studio my daughter-in-law had just casually declared she was taking over still had Carol's last half-finished painting on the easel. I had not moved it. I was not ready to move it, and I was certainly not going to let Renee move it. Here is what I also want you to understand. I could have called my son back, right then, and said no. 2 letters, 1 syllable. Done. But I had learned something in 64 years that I don't think my son's wife had learned in 35. Telling an entitled person no simply resets the clock. It doesn't end anything. If I had said no, Renee would have spent the next 6 months running a campaign. She would have called my son's aunts, his cousins, his college friends. She would have framed me as the difficult old man pushing away his own family. She would have used my granddaughter Sophie like a chess piece, restricting visits until I complied. I had watched her do it before, not to me, but to my son's older sister, and to Renee's own mother, who now spent holidays alone in a condo in Boca Raton. No was not going to be enough. Renee needed to show herself, and I was going to make sure she had every opportunity to do exactly that. I poured out the cold coffee and went inside to make a phone call of my own. His name is Gerald Whitmore, and he has been my attorney since 1989. We went to the same church for 15 years, fished the same river every April, and he handled my wife's estate without charging me a single additional hour when the process took longer than expected. When I told him what my son had said, Gerald was quiet for a moment. "You want to fight it?" he asked. "I want to finish it," I said, permanently, once and for all. We talked for an hour. By the end of that call, we had the beginning of a plan. The first thing I did was contact a property management company I had worked with twice before on a rental property I no longer owned. I told them I needed to rent the main guest suite, the largest bedroom on the 2nd floor, the one with the private bathroom and the sitting area for a minimum of 30 days, beginning November 1st. Short-term rental, legitimate lease, signed paperwork. They found me a tenant within 4 days. A retired schoolteacher from Connecticut named Mrs. Hollis, who wanted somewhere quiet and scenic to spend a month while her own home underwent repairs. She was 67, soft-spoken, and came with 2 cardigan sweaters and a box of crossword puzzles. She was perfect. The second thing I did was have Gerald begin the paperwork to transfer the property into a revocable living trust, with specific language about permitted occupancy. I was the sole trustee. The trust document was thorough and airtight, and spelled out in plain English that no individual could claim residency or occupancy rights without written consent from the trustee. Gerald filed it with the county. It was done before the end of the week. The third thing I did was call my son back. "I've been thinking about what you said," I told him, which was true. I had been thinking about nothing else. You know what? Come on. Come visit. Come spend some time. I'd love to see Sophie. He sounded relieved in a way that told me the call had been harder for him than he let on. My son is not a bad man. He has never been a bad man. He is a man who married a woman with a force of personality he has spent 12 years learning to navigate, and somewhere in those 12 years he forgot that he was allowed to push back. Renee is really excited, he said. I'll bet she is, I thought. Come for the weekend first, I said. Get a feel for it. We'll have dinner, catch up properly. He agreed. They would come in 2 weeks, not 3. Renee apparently wanted to see the space before finalizing her moving timeline. Of course she did. In those 2 weeks, I did not sit idle. I walked through my house the way a stage director walks through a theater before a performance. I thought about what Renee would see, what she would want, and what she would do when she didn't get it. I had met my daughter-in-law at her wedding to my son 12 years ago, and I had spent the years since then learning her the way you learn weather patterns, not because you like them, but because you need to know when to bring in the boats. Renee was a woman who treated every room she entered as a room she was about to redecorate. She had an eye for value, real estate value, resale value, the kind of value you converted into money. She had grown up in a family that moved often, always chasing slightly better circumstances, and somewhere in that childhood she had decided that owning beautiful things in beautiful spaces was the safest possible proof that she had arrived somewhere worth staying. I did not begrudge her that ambition entirely, but my house was not her proof of anything. I spent 3 evenings carefully packing Carol's most fragile pieces from the studio. Her small pottery collection, her early watercolors, the photographs from our first years together. I moved them to the locked storage room at the back of the garage, which had a deadbolt and which I kept the only key to. I left the studio otherwise intact, including the unfinished painting on the easel. But I covered the easel with a drop cloth because the painting was mine to look at or not look at, and I did not want Renee's eyes on it. I removed the spare house keys from the lockbox beside the front door and replaced them with keys to the garden shed. I had a quiet conversation with Mrs. Hollis before she arrived, explaining that I had family visiting who might not be aware of her rental arrangement, and asked if she would be willing to simply present her lease agreement if anyone questioned her presence. She smiled at me over her crossword puzzle and said, "Honey, I raised 4 teenagers. I can handle a little awkward." The Friday they arrived, it was already dark by the time their car came up the drive. I watched the headlights sweep across the porch from the front window, and I felt something settle in my chest. Not anger, not nervousness, just the steady, quiet patience of a man who has already done all the work and is now simply waiting for events to unfold. I went to the door and opened it before they knocked. My son hugged me the way he does, too brief, slightly stiff, the way men hug when they haven't figured out how to be easy with each other anymore. I held on a second longer than he expected, and I felt him relax a little. Sophie ran past both of us straight to the kitchen, because she remembered I kept the good cookies in the blue tin, and I loved her for that unreservedly. My daughter-in-law walked in behind them and stopped in the entrance hall the way people stop when they're doing math in their head. Her eyes went to the ceiling, to the staircase, to the archway leading to the great room with the lake view. I watched her calculate. "Martin," she said, which is what she called me. Never Dad, never anything warmer. "It's even bigger than I remembered." "It photographs small," I said, which was not true, and we both knew it. I had made dinner. A real one-pot roast, the way Carol used to, with the small potatoes and the rosemary and the good bread from the bakery in town. Sophie ate 2 helpings and told me about her soccer team. My son talked about his job, a project he was managing that was giving him trouble. For a while, over that table, it felt almost like what it used to be. Then Renee said she wanted the tour. She walked through my house the way an assessor walks through a property. She opened closets. She commented on square footage. She stood in Carol's studio for longer than she stood anywhere else, and when she came back out, she said, "This room gets incredible afternoon light. It would make an excellent office." "It's a studio," I said. "For now," she said, and smiled. After dinner, when my son had taken Sophie upstairs to get her ready for bed, Renee sat across from me at the kitchen table with her hands folded and told me what she had decided. She said that she and my son were concerned about me being alone. She said the house was too large for one person and that it made more financial sense for a family to occupy it properly. She said she had already spoken to a decorator, just exploratory, just ideas about what could be done with the East Wing. She said, with the careful language of someone who had rehearsed this, that she thought we could make this work for everyone. I nodded through all of it. I poured her more coffee. I asked her questions about her plans, where she imagined the home office, how she thought the layout would work, what she had in mind for the guest suite. She told me, in some detail. The guest suite, she said, with the private bathroom and the sitting area, would be ideal for her mother. She's been talking about wanting to be closer to us. I nodded at that too. What I did not tell her was that the guest suite was, as of 3 days ago, legally occupied by a retired school teacher from Connecticut who had a signed lease and was, at that very moment, reading a crossword puzzle book in the sitting area Renee had just described as her mother's future bedroom. The next morning I was up at 5:30, as I always am. I made coffee and sat on the back porch and watched the lake come back to itself in the early light. At 7, I heard movement upstairs. At 7:15, I heard something else, a voice, sharp and surprised, in the hallway near the guest suite. Then a second voice, calm and slightly amused. Then footsteps on the stairs, fast. Renee came into the kitchen with the expression of a person who has just discovered something that should not exist. "There is a woman in that bedroom," she said. "That's Mrs. Hollis," I said. "She's renting the suite through November. Good tenant. Very quiet." The silence that followed was the kind that has temperature. "You rented out a room in your house," Renee said, without telling us. "I rented out a room in my house," I said, the way people who own houses do. My son came downstairs 20 minutes later, looking like a man who had already been briefed on the situation and did not know whose side he was supposed to be on. I poured him coffee and told him to sit down. "I want to talk to both of you," I said, "about the house." I set the trust documents on the table. Gerald had prepared a summary page, 1 page, plain language, no legal jargon. I slid it across to my son and watched him read it. It said that the property had been transferred to a living trust, that the trust governed occupancy, that no individual could establish residency without written consent from the trustee, that the trustee was me. My son read it twice. Then he looked up. "Dad, when did you do this?" 2 weeks ago, I said, right after the phone call. Renee was standing at the edge of the kitchen. She had not sat down. I noticed she was very still in the way that people are still when they are doing a great deal of work internally. "You did this because of us," she said. It was not quite a question. "I did this," I said, "because this is my home. It was my home before this conversation, and it will be my home after it. I built it with my wife. Her name is still on the foundation stone by the front walk, and it will stay there. I am not rattling around in it. I am living in it, the way she and I always intended to live in it, and I am going to keep living in it." I looked at my son when I said the next part. "You are welcome here anytime. You know that. Sophie can have the Lakeview room whenever you visit, for as long as you want to visit. But this is my house, not a family asset to be divided up, not an opportunity, mine." My son was quiet for a long moment. I watched him the way you watch someone work through something difficult, and I did not rush him. "Renee talked to a decorator," he said finally, quietly. "Before we even came." "I know," I said. He nodded once, slowly, like a man confirming something he had been hoping wasn't true. What happened next is the part I had not fully planned for, and in some ways it was harder than everything else. Renee left the kitchen. I heard her on the phone in the hallway for about 10 minutes. When she came back, she sat down across from me, and I could see she had shifted tactics the way intelligent people shift tactics. Not retreat, but reframe. "Martin," she said, "I think you've misunderstood our intentions. We're not trying to take anything from you. We're trying to be closer to family. Daniel misses you. Sophie adores you. We thought this would be good for everyone." It was well delivered. I'll give her that. "I appreciate that," I said. "And I mean it. Come visit. Come for Christmas. Bring Sophie for the whole summer if you want. I mean that, genuinely. But visiting and moving in are two different things. And I think somewhere in the last few weeks those two things got confused. I paused. Also, Renee, Carol's studio is not going to become your office. It's going to stay exactly as it is, with her things in it, for as long as I'm living in this house. That's not something I'm going to discuss. The name landed the way I knew it would. Renee had never fully understood what Carol meant to me, or perhaps she had understood and found it inconvenient. Either way, the name in that sentence was a line, and we both knew I had drawn it. She looked at me for a moment with an expression I hadn't seen from her before. Not anger exactly. Something more like recalculation. Fine, she said. It should have ended there. It almost did. But Renee was not finished. About a week later, my son called to apologize, and the call was genuine and painful in the way apologies are when the person making them has had to climb over something hard to get to you. He told me he hadn't known about the decorator. He told me he should have called me differently, should have asked instead of announced, and that he was sorry. I told him I knew, and I told him I loved him, and I told him to bring Sophie up before the lake froze over because she had talked about wanting to try ice skating. But Renee had a different call to make. She called my son's aunt Patricia, who is 71 and lives in Rochester, and has always had strong opinions about family unity. She told Patricia that I had become isolated and possibly erratic, that I had installed a stranger in my house and drawn up legal documents to prevent my own family from helping me. She called two of my son's cousins with versions of the same story. She was building something. I recognized the architecture of it, and she was doing it quietly, the way she always operated. I found out about it because my son's aunt Patricia called me directly. I don't know what's going on over there, Patricia said, but Renee called me and honestly, Martin, something about it felt off. What is actually happening? I told her. All of it. The Tuesday morning phone call, the decorator, the studio, the trust documents, Mrs. Hollis, and her crossword puzzles. There was a pause. She called me 3 times this week, Patricia said. I know, I said. She told me you were refusing to let Daniel see you. Patricia, I said. My son called me 4 days ago and we talked for 45 minutes about the best way to winterize a boat engine. He is welcome here whenever he wants to come. Another pause. Longer. All right, she said. All right, Martin. I hear you. I asked Patricia if she would be willing to come for Thanksgiving. I told her to bring whoever she wanted, her son, his kids, anyone who could make the drive. I told her I'd cook. She said yes immediately. Now, I want to be honest with you about something. What I am about to tell you, I did not plan this part. What happened at Thanksgiving was not a trap I set. It was a consequence that arrived on its own, the way consequences do when you have been patient enough to let them. Renee had not expected the table to be full. She and my son arrived the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, and I could see from the driveway that she had not anticipated Patricia's car, or the minivan belonging to my son's cousin Rick, or the unfamiliar sedan that turned out to belong to Rick's mother-in-law, who was in town for the holiday, and whom Patricia had brought along because the woman had nowhere else to go. 11 people around my table. Mrs. Hollis had departed the week prior, her lease completed, a thank you note, and a tin of butter cookies left on the kitchen counter. The house was mine again, fully and unambiguously, and I had set the table with Carol's good dishes and the candles she always insisted on for the holidays, and the centerpiece made of pine and dried lake grass that Sophie and I had assembled together that morning on the back porch. While my granddaughter explained the entire plot of a book she was reading, Renee walked into that house, and I watched her understand that the audience she had been quietly assembling against me was currently sitting in my dining room, waiting to eat my turkey. Dinner was what Thanksgiving should be, loud and warm and slightly chaotic, with Rick's kids trying to teach Sophie a card game she was too young for, and Patricia telling a story about my wife from 40 years ago that made me laugh and ache at the same time. My son sat next to me and helped me with the gravy the way Carol used to let him help when he was 10 years old, standing on a step stool so he could reach the stove. At some point during the meal, Patricia said to Renee casually in front of everyone, "Martin tells me you all had some confusion about the living situation here. Sounds like it got sorted out." Renee smiled. It was a practiced smile, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes. Everything's fine, she said. Good, Patricia said. Because I have to tell you, when you called me, I was worried. But I came here, and Martin's got a beautiful home, and he's clearly doing just fine, so she took a sip of wine. I'm glad it worked out. The table heard it. Not as confrontation, Patricia was too gracious for confrontation, but as a gentle, public accounting. A version of events offered without fanfare. I watched my son's cousin Rick look at Renee with a new kind of attention. The subtle shift of someone who has just received new information and is quietly updating their prior conclusions. Renee said nothing else of significance for the rest of the evening. After dinner, when the kids had moved to the living room and the dishes were being cleared, my son found me on the back porch. It was cold. The lake was going still and dark the way it does in late November, the last of the light sitting low in copper on the far shore. He stood beside me for a while without talking. She called Aunt Patricia, he said eventually. Yes, I said. She called Rick's mom too. And Joanne. He named 2 more relatives. She was trying to build a case. I know. He was quiet. The cold moved across the porch. I didn't know she did that, he said. Or I knew something was happening. I should have asked more questions. You're asking them now, I said. He leaned against the porch railing and looked at the lake, and I looked at him. My son at 38, still carrying in his face traces of the boy who used to fall asleep in the truck on the way home from fishing, cheek pressed to the window, tackle box rattling at his feet. She really wanted this house, he said. It was not a question. Yes, I said. I think I knew that, he said. I think I told myself it was about being closer to family. But I think I knew. I didn't say anything to that. Some things a man needs to say out loud just to hear himself say them, and the best thing you can do is simply witness it. I'm sorry, Dad, he said. I'm sorry for how I called you. The way I just announced it, that was wrong. It was disrespectful. It was, I said. And I forgive you for it. That's not even a question. He nodded. He looked like he might say something more, and then he didn't. And then he said, She's not a bad person. I want you to know that I know she's not a bad person. I don't think she is either, I said, and I meant it. People are rarely simply bad. They are usually afraid of something, reaching for something, compensating for something. That doesn't excuse the behavior. It just explains it. And explaining it is enough. I think she's scared, he said, about money, about security. She grew up not having things, and I think she sees this place, and he stopped. That's not your problem to solve. No, I said. But I'll tell you what is. Sophie grows up knowing this place. Sophie grows up coming here in the summers, learning to fish off that dock, helping me in the garden, sitting in the kitchen, eating Carol's cookie recipe. That is absolutely something we can make happen. And I want to make it happen. Whatever is going on between the 3 of us, that part doesn't have to be complicated. He turned to look at me. His expression was the one he used to have as a boy when he'd made a mistake and wasn't sure I was still on his side, still looking for evidence of how bad the damage was. I'm your father, I said simply. That's not something that comes with conditions. He cleared his throat and looked back at the lake. Inside, I could hear Patricia laughing at something Rick had said, and the clatter of Sophie winning whatever card game she'd been taught, announcing her victory at a volume only children can sustain without apology. 3 months have gone by since that Thanksgiving. Renee and I have not become close. I don't expect that we will, but my son calls more often now, not the dutiful monthly check-in, but actual calls. The kind where we run out of things to say and keep talking anyway. Sophie came for a week in February, and we skated on the edge of the lake, where it freezes reliably by the 2nd week of the month, and she told me she wanted to learn to paint. I took the drop cloth off Carol's easel that afternoon. The unfinished painting was still there, a study in light on water, the lake in late summer, all that gold and green. I set a new canvas next to it and showed my granddaughter how to hold a brush. The studio is still a studio. The key to the storage room is still on my keyring. The trust documents are still filed with the county. Mrs. Hollis sent a Christmas card with a note that said she'd loved the stay and the crossword puzzles, and would I mind if she came back in the spring. I wrote back and said the guest suite would be ready. Here's the thing about a home that took a lifetime to build. It carries the weight of all the love that was put into it. You can feel it when you walk through it in the quiet hours, before the rest of the world is awake, when the light is coming off the lake and the pine floors are warm under your feet, and the bookshelves your wife asked for are full of her books, still marked with her handwriting in the margins. You do not protect something like that by raising your voice. You do not protect it by arguing, or explaining yourself, or begging to be understood. You protect it by knowing its value more completely than anyone who wants to take it from you. You protect it by being patient. You protect it by being, when the moment calls for it, 2 steps ahead. And when your granddaughter asks why there's a painting that's not finished, you tell her the truth. Some things aren't meant to be finished. Some things are just meant to be loved exactly as they are. The lake is thawing now. By April, the heron will be back. I'll have my coffee on the back porch and watch the mist come up off the water, and I'll be exactly where I am supposed to be. Right here. In my own house.